I want to thank the foundation for inviting us and to thank the foundation for organizing this really great conference. As somebody who's attended a lot of March meetings, I know this is a really successful one, and you know, it's great to see people participating throughout the many sessions. As many of you have heard, and some of you maybe not, this is not Ahmed Mater. Surprise. No, sorry about that, but Ahmed was called away on an emergency to the United States and couldn't join us today. And though we're very disappointed because he's really a great artist and I'd love to have spoken with him, I was very fortunate that two artists that I have a long-standing relationship with happened to be in Sharjah, and since I've known them for so long, they could not say no. And so it's with, you know, great pleasure that I introduce Wu Tsang and Tuan Nguyen from Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, and Wu is living somewhere between the U.S. and Athens and the stratosphere. I'll just start with a quick bio that Tuan actually grew up primarily in the United States and went to school at UC Irvine for his undergraduate studies. And then I met him when he was a MFA student at Cal Arts. And we had the great fortune to work together several times since he was a student, probably. And Tuan, in 2006, established the collective, the Propeller Group. So some of you may know of his work as the Propeller Group. Today, the Propeller Group still has a remarkable exhibition at the San Jose Museum of Art. And so if any of you are rushing home to California, you can see that exhibition. He also has an exhibition in Ho Chi Minh City at the Factory. Is it still open? No, it's gone. Damn. He just had an exhibition at the Factory in Ho Chi Minh City with the curator Zoe Butt, who is here with us this week as well. Wu Tsang is an artist based, as I said, kind of based in Athens these days. Sorry. Where did it go? And Wu works primarily as a filmmaker and artist who's been exploring the relationship between nightlife and politics for the last decade. We also met while Wu was working in Los Angeles, and a lot of her early work had to do with documentary. I think that's really transformed over the last years, but I think this is a kind of great forum that these two artists happen to be here willing to present their work given the context of today. And I really wanted to thank the earlier talk by Salah Hassan and Mantia Diawara, where Mantia talked about the solidarity between intuitions, which I think is such a fitting term that would join us together. We had the great fortune to work together for the new museum, the 2012 New Museum Triennial called the Ungovernables. And I think we had maybe the absence of language to describe why we fit together in solidarity. It certainly isn't the global South, and it certainly isn't as Americans. But I think the idea of the solidarity of intuitions is really a beautiful thought to start on. So we're going to start today. Basically, the format is going to be that each of these artists is going to show you a little excerpt of their work, and then discuss that work a little bit, and then we're going to throw it back to you in the audience to ask some questions about the work. So Wu has agreed to go first.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be sitting here talking to you. I came to March meetings as someone to participate, and as a listener and audience member, I wasn't expecting to be on the mic, but it is so much an honor. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my practice. I do work, as Eungie said, primarily between documentary and performance, and I think for me, I started maybe more as a documentary filmmaker and have moved more into performance or working performatively and narratively because it was a way for me to kind of, I guess, just struggle with what I will continue to love and hate, which is the form of documentary film, because it's such a, it is something that is so close to the thing that I care about, but it will always also embody a lot of the violences of representation. So I think I also like filmmaking because I love to work collaboratively. I've been involved in a lot of collective collaborative projects, and filmmaking is something you need a lot of people to do. It's also, through performance, it can be a way to sort of, I guess, start to undo some of the power dynamics of being a director or the cameraman and being the subject or the performer, is that through a process of collaboration, you can start to really shift the dynamics of what it is that you're making. And it can be sort of a group activity, I guess. So for me, language is, as Eungie also kind of mentioned this word intuition, I think language is something that is deeply important to my practice. I always start from writing and text, but it's also something that's often escaping me, so I'm never trying to fix terms. So for me, terms are always provisional. It's something that we will always need to revise. I guess some of the words that I've been working with lately, mostly in collaboration for the past 3 years with the poet and theorist Fred Moten. I've done a series of works with him that are some live performance and some film. I'm gonna show a short clip of one of those. And I've been thinking a lot about, also I think especially given the conversations happening today around opacity, I've been thinking about the word unfixity and openness, and how unfixity can, when it's lived in the world, can be a threat to the existing order. And I think we all have certain kinds of experiences of that unfixity. So for me, it's something I think about a lot, is the sort of relationship between violence and unfixity, how those things are so close, because yeah, anyway, sorry, I lost my words there, but I'm actually gonna read I'm going to read a short paragraph from an essay written by Fred Moten that is actually, the film that I made is a response to this essay. It's called Leave Our Mics Alone, that he co-wrote with Stefano Harney. And I think one of the reason I chose this particular thing is that I wanted to think about how, as a filmmaker, and as a visual artist, I'm interested in finding ways through poetry and through visual languages and through, I guess, a sort of a bodily understanding of something to kind of communicate some of these very complex and radical politics through, to enact, what does it mean to enact refusal, or to enact entanglement through actual camera, through actually thinking through what the camera's doing and how it sees, and seeing how that there can be a violence to that, but also a pleasure that it produces. So this little excerpt that I'll read, there is a concept that goes throughout the essay, but it's about the unavailable image. And I think that's something that I continue to be thinking about, is what could it mean to produce an unavailable image if the image is unavailable? So I guess these spaces of impossibility are very productive for me right now. And I won't get too hung up on the words, because again, they'll need to be revised as we continue. But so I'll just read this passage from Fred's essay, and then I'll show the clip. How can we survive genocide? We can only address this question by studying how we have survived genocide. In the interest of imagining what exists, there is an image of Michael Brown we must refuse in favor of another image we don't have. One is a lie, the other unavailable. If we refuse to show the image of a lonely body, of the outline, the space that body simultaneously took and left, We do so in order to imagine jurisgenerative Black social life walking down the middle of the street for a minute, but only for a minute, unpoliced. Another city gathers, dancing. We know it's there and here and real. We know what we can't have happens all the time. So yeah, I guess I could play the clip. Sure.
She was talking about making dances, pacing back and forth across bridges, riding up and down the block, selling Lucy's on the corner, walking in the middle of the street. The hazard of movement, of moving and being moved, of knowing that we are affected, that we are effective. There's danger, too, in the very fact of this reminder, even if it's just a taste of what you haven't seen.
Yeah, I guess it's important to note that this is a 2-channel film where the projections overlap, so there's an intentional space, I guess, between where the images sometimes bleed or cut each other.
Hello. So while I'm setting up
You came to see human bodies tonight, but she said this is holy work.
I'm all about lip sync. You'll see. You'll see.
We're not going.
So while I'm setting up this video, I'd like to also thank Sharjah Art Foundation for creating this space and this temporality for all of us to tremble together. And also to Eungie Joo for having us, inviting us to share the stage with you. It's an honor to do that with you and Woo as well. And thank you all for being here. I know it's towards the end of the day and coffee's running low and yeah. But so I'd be honored to share a little excerpt of a recent film that I did that was completed in the beginning of 2007. It's I think a 7-minute excerpt. Hopefully that's not too long for everybody. But it's a 42-minute single-channel video that I got the honor and the privilege to present for the first time at the Whitney Biennial. Thank you, Christopher Liu and Mia Laux, for allowing me that space to do so. But before I show the clip, I wanted to kind of frame this little excerpt really quick and the history behind some of the things that we're going to see in the video. So I had been really focused for about 2 years working on a project with the collective that I work with called the Propeller Group. But when that project was over, it was a very kind of scientific process, this project with the Propeller Group, where we were trying to shoot an AK-47 rifle with an M16 rifle to kind of merge the 2 bullets and create art objects out of that kind of that fusion. So it was really scientific. It was like, you know, a really long process. But after that was done, I got this chance to kind of sit down again, and I began to kind of turn my individual attention towards a very kind of personal part of my own history as a refugee. There was a term that was being used back in the 70s and the 80s called boat person or boat people. And it was quite a popular term, but it seems like we've, for the most part, forgotten this whole kind of history, this whole kind of this other refugee crisis that was happening. And it was also a kind of history that I was extremely hesitant to kind of look at for fear of many things. But the biggest fear of all was not having enough kind of critical distance from it to create a work that could be poetic. But you know, my research and my fascination with this idea of a testimonial object and histories that have been erased, systematically erased, kind of kept leading me back to this island, this small island off the northeastern coast of Malaysia called Pulau Bidong. It's right at the end of the south of the South China Sea. And it's an island that my family and I had stopped by when I was 2 years old, after we had escaped on a boat from Vietnam, and after having spent about 10 days at sea, we came to this island. Of course, I have no real recollection of the time on the island. Our time was extremely short because we then got transferred to a refugee camp on the mainland of Malaysia. But I was extremely young. I don't have any recollection of the island, but growing up in a diasporic kind of Vietnamese community, you would hear these stories and these mythologies of the island, these myths of this island constantly. The island became mythical. It was a mythical space. So let me see, maybe I can just give you a little bit of background on the island and on that kind of era that was happening, the crises that was happening in the late 70s. So no, there are no actual numbers agreed to by these organizations that were dealing with refugees and that refugee crisis. But a safe number to say would be that 3 million people from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos escaped towards the end of the 70s. This is after the Vietnam War, after the US withdrew from Vietnam, after the communist government from the north of Vietnam came down and took over the south. So out of the 3 million people, about 2 million Vietnamese people left by sea. But only about 1 million people got to their destination. So we're assuming that 1 million people died at sea. So in comes this island called Bidong Island. And Bidong Island was not only a myth after it had become a refugee camp, but it was a myth before it became a refugee camp. There was word that was getting back to Vietnamese people still living in Vietnam that there was opportunities and chances for an escape at sea to reach places like Pulau Bidong, which kind of increased the flow of Vietnamese boat people escaping Vietnam. So Pulau Bidong became the largest and the longest running refugee camp after the Vietnam War. Over 250,000 people inhabited this very small plot of land, about the size of a football field, between 1978 and 1991. So at one point, this was in the early 80s, Pulau Bidong became the densest place on Earth in terms of the ratio of bodies to space. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees closed the camp in 1991, and at that time they repatriated 5,000 people, the 5,000 people that were still living in the refugee camp of Pulau Bidong. So they were sent back to Vietnam to face imprisonment and other kinds of punishment. So all of this is extremely humongous for me to think about in terms of a kind of traumatic historical moment, but also these numbers are just too huge. So I was, for me, trying to find a way to kind of engage with not only the physicality, the space of the island, but also with this history. So as I started returning to the island in 2015, I became fascinated with the monuments and the memorials that were still there, that were slowly deteriorating, but they were still existing on the island at the time. And these monuments and these memorials were not only built by refugees who were living on the island at the time, they were refugees, but they were also built by former refugees who would return after they had gotten to their third country, after they'd had kind of established a new home in different countries. They would return to the island to pay homage to the island, to make offerings to the different gods of the islands. Yeah, that was extremely fascinating for me. And the island, over its time after 75, became known as the spirit of Bidong. Like, people would actually call the island Old Father Bidong as an endearing term. So the island became a character, like a god. So this film is actually an accumulation of footage shot from multiple points of view over the last, I think, almost 50 years or so on the island. And so this includes footage that I shot that kind of unfolds a very simple narrative that takes place in a dystopian future in which the last man on Earth, and his story actually begins when the repatriation happens. His family, not wanting to be repatriated to Vietnam, kind of escapes and hides in the forbidden part of the island. So we're imagining that he's possibly the grandchild of that family. So he's been living on this island by himself for a long time, kind of not having any kind of access to the rest of the world. He suddenly finds a scientist, and we find out that she's a United Nations scientist and the sole survivor of the world's last nuclear battle. And she was washed ashore. So it's a very simple kind of dystopian narrative, but that kind of narrative is then weaved together with, you know, archival footage of the island. There's footage shot by Ed Bradley, a really kind of important US journalist he was the first journalist to be allowed onto the island to document and kind of break the story. So this clip is a little bit of the archival footage, a scene in which the two protagonists kind of argue about leaving the island. And then the main protagonist breaks into, okay. Well, I was actually gonna contextualize the song, but then I guess I'll do that afterwards, yeah.
To last long if we don't find more sources of food.
Dụng hết rồi, nên giờ côn trùng đại.
We're not going to last long if we don't find more sources of food.
Dụng hết rồi, nên giờ côn trùng đại.
We need to leave the island.
Đã nói là không có đi đâu hết.
We need to build a raft that can travel far.
Cô trôi xa lắm mới tới được đây mà đâu cần thuyền. Cô làm được.
We won't make it far.
À, tôi nghĩ là nếu mà mình ở dưới nước đủ lâu á, thì phóng xạ từ cái vụ án bom nổ sẽ biến chúng ta thành những quái vật biển kỳ diệu và chúng ta sẽ sống hoài hoài luôn á.
We're not going to survive if we don't leave the island.
Do you think the people of the United States will accept Vietnamese refugees?
In certain cases, I think that they will accept.
In certain cases? Which cases?
Those who have families there, and those who have worked for the Americans, and those who have been in the army.
What about the others who have never worked for Americans, who don't have families there? What happens to them?
I think that the Americans will make a choice and receive them, or those who haven't been accepted by other countries.
The United States will take all?
Yes.
You really believe that?
I hope.
Malaysia's principal complaint is there's no sign the exodus is ending, and the resettlement of refugees is lagging far behind arrivals. In the past 6 months, 8,000 people have been resettled in the U.S. or in other countries from this camp, but in the same period, 24,000 have arrived here.
Cứ có người đến hoặc đi, thì đạo hát bài này.
Ngày mai em đi biển nhớ tên em gọi về, gọi hồn liêu rũ lê thế, gọi bờ cát trắng đêm khuya. Ngày mai em đi đôi núi nghiêng nghiêng đợi chờ, ngày mai em đi biển có bâng khuâng gọi thầm ngày mưa tháng nắng còn buồn bàn tay nghe ngóng tin xa ngày mai em đi thành phố mắt đêm đèn vàng nửa bóng xuân qua ngập ngừng nghe trời gió lộng mà thương.
So can I tell him about the song now? So actually the song, when he breaks into song during this excerpt, is a song that was played. It was a popular song during the wartime era, and it was a song that they would blast over the loudspeakers every time a new boat would come to welcome the new boat, or they would blast this song as people got to leave the island. So it became a song that was kind of playing continuously, and it became kind of this voice of the island. So I was thinking about music not only as a way of sharing a collective memory, but also as a way of memorializing and empowering that collective experience. So if we can imagine song as a memorial or as a material that contains a history, something like an oral tradition or poetic sound that kind of activates memories in ways that could be political. So that's the song. It's called Binya, which translates into English as the sea remembers or the sea recalls.
Thanks so much. I think I wanted to try to connect my thoughts about both of you a little through what Wu mentioned through Fred's writing as the unavailable image. You know, thinking about what Tuan is saying is trying to find maybe the poetic and folkloric power of song as, you know, the basis from which to make a memorial, or the song standing in for the memorial. So there, in that case as well, like an imagination that can't even be imaged. And so I think in your case, you know, in this clip that you showed us, you know, to think about using dance and movements and the interaction between bodies to also suggest the imaging of something potentially so violent or horrific that it has to transform itself beyond a representational image of that thing. So I wanted to, you know, ask you a little bit about, if you could speak a little bit more about that, how you address this idea of the unavailable image.
Well, it's always hard in like a short, you know, a 10-minute presentation to convey like the breadth of a practice, and I sometimes do often work with different kinds of footage that are maybe more of a kind of verite thing, and in this instance, given the subject matter, it felt really important to task myself with creating the image, and something that was very operative for me was this idea of choreographing the camera movement before anything else. And the camera choreography corresponds to these chapters of the essay, and it's somewhat literal, I guess you could say, but what that opened up for me, which is something I feel like I'm just at the beginning of, it is this idea of giving the agency to the performers or the subjects to, like, they have the choice to be on camera or not. They can move. The camera basically has to move independently from what's happening in the scene. It's one of the characters. It dances. It's also just like it doesn't have the choice to follow its desire. You know, it doesn't have the choice to frame its subject even. So in that sense, I wanted to kind of reverse something in the approach. That's, I guess, just like one partial answer to your question, but it is something I'm thinking about a lot. I guess I've become like more and more sensitive to images of violence. Like, I think they're so frequent. We've become so unable to. I'm wondering how to produce people's a real response, and to me, that's not shock is not necessarily the strategy right now. So.
The unavailable image. I think there's an anthropologist by the name of Marianne Hirsch who writes about this idea of post-memory and about how the photographic image becomes the mode in which these memories of traumatic histories are kind of transferred from one generation to the next, without the second generation having ever physically experiencing those traumatic histories. And she talks about the photographic image, the image as being a very kind of crucial mode of that transmission. In my family, when we left, there were no more images because they all either got destroyed at sea or they got left behind. So I think about that instance as when I think about this idea of the unavailable image, and I think about all the ways in which people have found to replace that void through stories, through song, through these other acts that they do, building memorials, building monuments, creating other kind of testimonial objects that aren't image, but that can conjure up image. Yeah.
I'm very conscious of the time, and I think we only have 7 more minutes. 5. Wow. See, it's even worse. Some of you may, I'm really sorry that this is such a short presentation, but I'm hoping that some of you may be familiar with either of these guys' work. So if you would like to, if there are any questions from out there, I'd like to offer this chance.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see your film, Wu. I'm really happy to see it again. But my question's actually for you, Antoine. Antoine? Sorry. Tuan. Sorry.
You can call me Antoine, it's fine. A lot of my friends do.
It's about sort of the way in which the sea is a kind of character and has a kind of agency, but yet is also kind of a void and a site of loss. And I was thinking about that in relationship to the presence of the island and the kind of, even within the short clip that we saw traces and residues of what looked like shrines and traces of boats. And so I was wondering what you would say about the island as a character in your film.
Yeah, in this clip, actually, we don't see this other monument that they built, which is it's a monument in the shape of an old man pulling out a young woman from the sea, and it's made in concrete. And it's a monument to Old Father Bidong, the spirit of Bidong. So the 40-minute project, 42-minute project actually explores the island as a character that's changing in time. Because now that everybody's left, it's a desolate island, although it's still public space, you can get to it very easily. It is being taken over by nature. Like it's all the monuments are being kind of, plants are overgrown and the weather is deteriorating the monuments. My interest actually in the island was in a monument that was built in 2005 by former refugees who came back to build a monument on the island to give thanks and to kind of acknowledge the journey of these refugees. That monument actually was destroyed 6 months later. So it turns out that under the pressure of the Vietnamese government, who had found out about this memorial, they pressured the Malaysian government to come and destroy that monument. So even in 2005, like 30, 40 years after all these events had occurred, there was still a battle for this kind of memory in this public space. So the island is still kind of this place that's changing, like a character that's evolving. People still return to make plaques and give memorial and make offerings to the island. There's a lot of people that are buried on the island, so family members still come and make offerings to the graves and stuff. So the island is definitely a character. And it becomes a really kind of a psychological space, because one character wants to stay and protect the island and upkeep the memorials and the monuments, while the other character is thinking about the future and like leaving and, you know, surviving. So it becomes a psychological space where these kind of conflicts are played out.
Do we have a question? I think Ryan's got a question.
Maybe, I think it's a question for either one of you. I guess there's kind of this, I don't know how else to describe it, but kind of surreal kind of feeling in both of your works. And, you know, like maybe like 5 years ago, I would think that, you know, like I never was really drawn to surrealism or to kind of this surreal feeling. Or I thought it really had any sort of agency or capacity to kind of access reality, like as we were kind of thinking about it a few years ago. But I was actually working here on this show on Egyptian surrealism, and through Salah Hassan was introduced to this book that was about, it's called Black, Brown, and Beige. And in this introduction, the editors talk about surrealism as like not anti-reality, or not kind of, not anti-reality, but actually more reality. And so I'm kind of wondering if you can kind of speak about these other registers or these other kind of places we're trying to access that like realism doesn't quite allow us to get at right now, or what we might think of conventionally as realism.
Well, one thing with this work is I was very particular about the lens, and the lens is this very, very wide, it's like it's a very strange lens. And I was really obsessed with this idea that it would feel like it was trying to see everything, kind of like a Google Earth sort of eye, but that causes so much distortion, and allow the performers really to like play with that. So I guess that's a kind of a hyper reality that I'm continuing to be interested in. I also think that the imagination is another weapon, I guess. Like it's something I'm also I'm trying right now to just really focus on what are the things that we do as like our communities that are these impossible communities, or these lives that are not, we're told that we don't exist, or that it's not possible, and then thinking about how that within those spaces so much is created. There's a kind of a lawlessness that enables us to like I guess form a kind of resistance differently. So.
No, I think the idea of resistance is extremely important, and I think, you know, the space of migration is an imaginative space. I think this was kind of, you know, brought to our attention in the previous conversations, but I totally agree, and it's the space of future thinking. For a subject like myself, who kind of tries to look at the past and kind of and tries to kind of unpack why things happen, and when there's so many holes in those kind of stories, in those narratives, you don't have anything but your imagination to fill in the blanks. And I think those kind of, you know, imagined realities are what we have and what we maintain as a form of resistance, just like what we were saying.
Yeah, actually, just what you're saying reminded me again about this word opacity, and it just like my father's family fled from China during the Communist Revolution, and growing up, he always had the most obscure way of talking about his migration because it was very traumatic, and his assimilation into America has always been, and language is a pain. Everything about it's like, and it's just funny because my like white mother would always narrate his story to me, and it's so funny because I'm realizing as I at this age I just really embrace the partial truth that is his story. It's like I can't know, and why would we want to put that in a line, you know, because that's not the kind of story I want to tell. So I feel like I really inherited that sense of, yeah.
On that note about the stories that we're going to transcend, I want to thank you guys for joining us today, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.